Hello, how are you? My name's Eamonn. I'm a storyteller. So, if you'd like to sit yourself down or get yourself comfortable, I'm here to tell a few stories, and I hope you enjoy them. Now, the first story is a story that starts some stories. Here it is. The storyteller, Kieran O'Kelly, was well known around the south of Ireland. He would travel here and there, anywhere he could to tell a story. Yeah, he loved to tell stories. And if there was a ceilidh or a hoolie or a wedding or a wake, he'd be there. And this was a long time ago. This was way before the time of TVs and radios and internet and cars and trains, everything like that. No, they just didn't have them. If you wanted to go somewhere, you had to walk, unless you were rich and had a horse, or maybe you had a wee donkey. But most people had to walk, and Kieran had to walk. He had to walk to find work. So he travelled around trying to find work to earn a few pennies. But when he got to somewhere where he was going, he was made very welcome because of his great storytelling. People would be so happy to see him. And they'd bring him in and they'd feed him and give him a bed if he needed it. And, well, they couldn't pay him, but they would look after him. So if there was a wee ceilidh going on, he'd be given a wee drink. He'd sit next to the fire and the children would be sitting there, and the older children, and then the big ones, the mummies and the daddies and the big brothers and the grannies and the aunts. They would all be sitting around, all listening to the great stories and the crack that Kieran Kelly brought with him. And he'd sing songs, silly songs. He loved to hear the laughter of children, as do I. So, here we go. I'm going to sing two wee songs. Maybe you could learn one. It's very short. Skinny Malink Melodian had big banana feet. Went to the doctors and couldn't get a seat. And when he got a seat, he fell fast asleep. Skinny Malink Melodian had big banana feet. Now, that's not exactly a song. It's more of a rhyme. And it's very silly. But sure, it's only a bit of fun. Perhaps you could learn it. I'll do it very slowly, and then you can have a wee go at it. Skinny Malink, Melodian head, big banana feet. Went to the doctors and couldn't get a seat. And when he got a seat, he fell fast asleep. Skinny Malink, Melodian head, big banana feet. So that's the song, or the poem, or the rhyme, or whatever you want to call it. But it's always better if you say it very fast. And the faster you can say it, whoa, you'd be very skilled. So here we go. Skinny Malink, Melodian head, big banana feet. Went to the doctors and couldn't get a seat. And when he got a seat, he fell fast asleep. Skinny Malink, Melodian head, big banana feet. There you go. So if you get to learn it, that would be something to tell your friends and impress them with. Vocal dexterity is called. Now, here's another one. Maybe your mummies and daddies, or maybe your grannies would know this. It used to be sung in Belfast in the old days. Mama, won't you buy me a Mama, won't you buy me a banana? Yes, son, I'll buy you a Yes, son, I'll buy you a banana. Mama, will you peel the skin? Mama, will you peel the skin of my banana? Yes, son, I'll peel the skin. Yes, son, I'll peel the skin of your banana. Mama, would you like a bite? Mama, would you like a bite of my banana? Yes, son, I'd like a bite. I love a bite. I love a bite. Yes, son, I love a bite. A bite of your banana. Mama, you're a greedy gut, greedy gut, greedy gut. Mama, you're a greedy gut. You've eaten my banana. Oh dear. Again, just a silly song. Anyway, when they'd be sitting around back in the wee cottages or wherever it was that Kieran O'Kelly and the storyteller would tell his stories, the children he loved were sitting there, and he loved the children. He loved the joy and laughter of children, and he tried to make them laugh. And the children loved to hear the old stories, the stories of the olden days. But Kieran would tell little bits of the stories, because some of them were very long, and some of them were only for adults because they were quite gory. Now, he would tell bits of stories to enable people to hear the stories and remember them, so that when they got older, well, they would have learned the story. So here's one. It's a little bit from a big long story, and it's about the Dagda's harp. The Dagda, the great good god, was the leader of the Tuatha Dé Danann when they fought against their enemies, the Fomorans. The Fomorans were led by Bress, who was an awful person altogether, very mean and, well, very untrustworthy. You couldn't trust him with anything. He was always trying to steal stuff. And the Fomorans were known for this. They only had one eye to see what they could steal, on one hand to see what they could take. However, the Fomorans and the Tuatha Dé Danann met at the battlefield, and they set up their camps and went into battle against each other. The battle went well eventually for the Tuatha Dé Danann, and knowing that they were defeated, Bress decided to get revenge. So he and some soldiers stole the harp of the Dagda, a magical enchanted harp. They stole it from the Dagda's tent, and off they went, running away, trying to hide what they'd stolen. They set up their own tent, by a stream. But the Dagda and his followers caught up with them. The Dagda went into the tent where Bress and his men were. He went in and called out for his harp. He was not afeard of Bress or his warriors. The Dagda called out to his harp, "Come, come, my precious one. Come, apple of my eye. Come to me." And just like that, magically, the harp flew through the air and killed 9 of the warriors. It flew so fast back to the Dagda. The warriors were incensed, but the Dagda was not afeard. No, the Dagda played the harp. He played a tune that was so merry and so joyful that the soldiers, including Bress, all they could do was laugh. They started to laugh, roaring their heads off. They couldn't move. They were holding their sides and they were shaking and rocking. Oh, my heavens. They laughed. Oh, well, some of them almost died of laughter. Then the Dagda stopped and played another tune. A tune that was so sad, so wistful, so mournful, that they all began to cry, these brave men. 1 minute laughing and now crying. They were crying, weeping huge tears, rivers of tears. They couldn't move. with sadness. And then the Dagda played a third tune, different type of music. And that music was music of sleep. And just in a moment, all those warriors fell asleep into a deep, deep sleep. And then the Dagda left with his men and returned back to the camp of the Tuatha De Danann. And there was music that night. Music that is played in Ireland even to this day. The music of joy, the music of sorrow, and the music of rest and repose. Now, Kieran would also love to tell stories to children and mummies and daddies and the older ones that maybe they'd learn something from. And here's a story, the type of story he could have told. And it's called The Bag of Sorrow. Now, there was a little girl, and as she was growing up, her life became sadder and sadder. She had friends, yes, and she had a brother who was a bit cheeky, but they loved each other. And she had lovely parents. But she was always worrying. Now you'd think, well, what is she to worry about? But actually, if you think about it, we all have worries. We all have fears. We all have concerns about how things are. And this little girl, well, she tried to talk to her brother, but her brother was on his Xbox. And he just said, catch yourself on. You'll be grand, everything's grand. And the little girl didn't want to tell her mammy and daddy because they had their own worries. The little girl told her best friend, and her best friend told her to hide her worries, put them away, and maybe put them into a bag. A bag? Yeah, put them into a bag and then put the bag into a cupboard and forget about it. Well, for a few days that worked. But the thing is that if you know where your worries are, you'll keep coming back to them. And worries don't like to be hidden. They might call out to you in the dark of night or when you're walking down the street. So she went and looked at that bag. And then she started to carry it around with her. And she worried more and more about different things. She was going to believe in the school she was at, to go to the big school, and how would she fit in? What if people made jokes about her? Maybe if people said things about her being too fat or too skinny or too stupid. What if she couldn't make friends? What if she didn't do well in school? What if her mammy and daddy or her granny and granddad or her brother, what if they got sick, got ill? She just worried, and as she worried, that bag with all the worries in it seemed to get bigger and bigger and bigger and heavier. And she carried it around with her. She carried it like it was like up here on her shoulder, and it made her put her head down. So more than often, she would look at the ground, she wouldn't look up. She was always feeling down. One day, she was supposed to go to school. She left home and went to the park, sat on a bench and began to cry. She held her head in her hands like this and cried about all those worries, all those fears, all those things that upset her. And as she sat there crying, an old lady came by, and the old lady said, "Hello, dear. You're upset. The little girl looked up and saw it was her neighbour, a lovely, quiet old lady. And the little girl said, yeah, I just worry about everything. Said the old lady, let me tell you something. Shuffle up there. So the little girl shuffled up and the old lady sat down beside her. And they started talking. The old lady told her that we all have worries. We all have fears. We all have concerns. And then she said the strangest thing. You wouldn't have any sweeties, would you? And the little girl said, well, actually I do. And she brought out her favourite sweeties in a wee bag and said to the old lady, here you are. Please, please, please share my sweets. The little girl was delighted that the old lady just wanted to listen to her. So they sat there and had a few sweeties. And then the old lady said, everybody has concerns. Everyone has worries. There's nothing wrong in that. It's just the way it is. Nobody knows what's going to happen tomorrow. But here's the thing. When you go home tonight and it's time for bed, don't forget to give your mommy and your daddy and your brother, give them a hug. When you go to bed, say a wee prayer. Say a wee prayer so that you'll be feeling better in the morning. The little girl thought, yeah, okay, all right. Prayer. Feel better? Okay. But she didn't say it to the old lady. So anyway, she went home. And sure enough, that night, she went to bed after saying good night to mommy, daddy and brother. And then when she got up to her room, she got dressed for bed. And she decided, well, maybe it won't do any harm. So she knelt down and she said a wee prayer. Then she got into bed and fell asleep. And when she slept, she began to dream. It was a strange dream. She dreamt she was in a cave and all around were bags. Lots and lots and lots of bags. And then she heard a voice saying, welcome to my cave. This is the cave of the bags of sorrows. And you have one. I look after the bags of sorrows. And the little girl looked at this wonderful old woman with long white hair and a long white dress. And her face seemed familiar. Maybe like the lady in the park. And the lady said, we all have worries. We all have fears and concerns. Perhaps you'd like to put your bag down and then have a look and see if you can get a smaller bag. Well, the little girl did that and she looked around and sure enough, there were some bags that were absolutely enormous. And there were some bags that were tiny. So she found a small one and she opened it. And to her surprise, even though it was small, it was full of the same sort of worries that she had. And then the beautiful old woman said, now what about the bag on your other shoulder? The little girl had never thought about this and never seen this. And so she looked and there, sure enough, on her other shoulder, there was another bag. And the bag was not like the one that she had with all her worries, which was grubby and horrible looking. No, this was beautiful. So she took the bag down and she looked at it and it was so beautifully made, so beautifully crafted. such beautiful colours. And there were little diamonds and emeralds and gold and silver sewn into the bag. And she opened it up. It was a bag of treasures. And each of them was something that she could do and did do. She was kind to people. She listened to her friends when they had their worries. She was always generous. And she tried her best. And she had hopes and dreams for the future. And she loved her parents and her brother so much. There were so many good things about her. And they shined like treasures. Yes, said the old lady, you have worries, but you also have gifts. And these gifts are treasures. Treasures that you can give to others and share with others. It is time to go back now. And the little girl went back to sleep. And the dream faded away. And in the morning when she got up, the sun was shining on her face. Today would be a better day. Oh yeah, she had her worries. But she would think about them and try to solve them, whatever problems that were there. And she would never worry too much about things because, well, worrying doesn't help. But it does hurt you when you're worrying nothing else matters. But it's also important to remember that if you have a bag of worries, you also have a bag of treasures, of gifts that you can share with everyone. So that's the story of the bag of sorrows. Now back to Kieran O'Kelly, because the story is about him, really. Now, as I said, Kieran was a great storyteller and he would travel around, but he'd never had much money. He had very, very few coins or anything in his pockets. Very little money. But he was always well looked after, as I said. He always had a meal wherever he went, and he'd drink, or if he needed a bed for the night, he was always welcome. But because he had to walk everywhere, things were very difficult because his shoes would wear out. Now, one day he was sitting by the side of a river. He took his shoes off and he looked at his shoes. Well, they were actually boots. And the boots were falling apart. They were as thin as paper on the soles. And they were starting to go like that, split open, so that the boots wouldn't let in water. And his poor feet, especially his toes, well, they would be very sore. He put his feet in the water. Oh, the cool water was just so beautiful. The cool water relaxed his feet. And he started to sink. Diddly-I-dim, diddly-I-dee, diddly-I-do-do-do, diddly-I-dum, diddly-I-dee, diddly-do-do-do-do. Well, something like that. The next thing was, he heard a strange sound. He knew what it was straight away. It was a tap, 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 tap. Kieran turned round, and sure enough, there was a leprechaun making a pair of shoes. Tiny, tiny shoes. Tiny, tiny shoes. Leprechaun shoes. The leprechaun saw Kieran. He saw Kieran and said, "Hello, Kieran O'Kelly. This is a grand day for me meeting you. How are you keeping?" And Kieran says, I'm not doing too bad, just travel around and I love to tell stories. Oh, we know about you, Kieran O'Kelly. We know about you. You tell great stories, and you always mention the leprechaun in your stories. And you tell stories about the olden days, and you sing songs and everything. It's always great to know you around the place. And you may be surprised to know this, but when we get the chance, we small folk, we love to listen to your stories. And then the leprechaun looked down and said, what on earth are those? And Kieran said, that's my wee boots. My boots, well, you see, I've no money, so my boots are always the worst sort of boots. And I can't afford to get really decent shoes or boots for walking around, and I have to walk around an awful lot. Says the leprechaun. I'm making a pair of boots for himself, the king of the fairies. They are brogues, the magical shoes that are made by the leprechauns. I'm making a pair now. But seeing it's yourself, Kieran O'Kelly, and you're in need, I'm going to give you the pair. And you'll never need another pair of shoes or boots in your life, for these are magical enchanted boots. Kieran said, but sure, they're very small, very, very tiny shoes. Don't you worry about that. As soon as you put them on your feet, they will grow, and they will grow, and they will fit you perfectly. And don't worry about the king of the fairies. I'll make him another pair. Kieran put them on. These magical boots that he'd been given, the brogues. Well, they fitted so well. They were so comfortable. They made him feel light. Even though he wasn't a young man, they made him feel joyful. And he started he started singing his wee song. Diddly-di-dee-doo, diddly-di-day, diddly-doo-doo. And he started to dance around, and he'd kick up in the air, and he'd click his heels together. And he'd be dancing and dancing. And he was just so happy. These were the most beautiful and most wonderful shoes. Brogues now, that's what they're called. Brogues, said the leprechaun. Oh, they're wonderful. They're wonderful, these brogues. Now, the leprechaun said, a word of warning. You'll never outgrow these shoes, and they'll never wear out. What do we call these shoes? Brogues, said Kieran. That's right, said the leprechaun. They're brogues. They'll never wear out. But should you mention where you got these brogues from me, should you mention that to any human being, then the brogues will disappear, just like that. Well, said Kieran, quite surprised. Thank you for letting me know. I promise I won't tell a soul about where I got them from. Oh, and thank you very much, sir. Thank you for being so kind and generous. Well, Kieran, said the leprechaun, I have to go. You be on your way now. I'm sure we'll meet again someday. Take care, and keep telling those stories. Well, Kieran leapt and jumped and run down the road towards Tipperary town. He just couldn't get over just how light his whole feet and his whole body were with these magical brogues. Not shoes or boots, brogues. So, when he started going to all the different hoolies and ceilidhs and weddings and wakes, not only did he tell stories and sing wee songs, he also did wee dances, and people loved him for it. Life was so good for him. He travelled around and his shoes made sure he got to wherever he was going, no matter how far away it was. And he never felt tired. But one day he was sitting at the side of the road. He was just feeling a wee bit sort of old, Well, he was quite old and he was just resting, but he was just taking in a wee bit of the sunshine as well, just relaxing. And this man came by, must have been very rich because he had a horse. And the rich man looked down at him and said, "Excuse me, sir, you're a man of the road. What is a man of the road doing with a pair of shoes such as those? They are the most elegant shoes I've ever seen." And Kieran O'Kelly, without thinking about it, said, "Oh, these brogues, they were made for the King of Ireland." But a leprechaun he stopped. He realised he'd told the man where he had got the brogues. He broke his word. Well, the man said, "Thank you very much, sir. Interesting." And off he went. Kieran looked down at his feet and the brogues were gone. He had to walk into the nearest village or town and try and get a wee pair of old boots. He didn't have any money, or very little money, and so the boots that he got were, well, they were terrible condition, falling apart almost. And so he started walking around. He had places to go and people to see. But he'd lost that twinkle, he'd lost that smile, he'd lost that shine. He was no longer the happy man that he was. And he regretted telling where he got his brogues from. He broke his word. So the months went by and a year or two went by and things got worse and worse. He'd lost his joy in life. He'd lost his joy in telling stories and dancing and singing. And people weren't asking him to come around as much. One day he came to a familiar spot and he sat down. He sat down by the river. "Oh," he said as he put his feet in that river. This was the same place where he'd been given those beautiful brogues. And then he heard the tap, tap, tap. And he turned round and sure enough, it was the very same leprechaun. And the wee leprechaun looked at him and said, "Kieran, you're not looking well at all. What's the matter? What's your problem?" And Kieran told him what had happened, how he'd actually blurted out about where he got his brogues from. And the leprechaun looked at him and said, "Kieran, I know for a fact that you're a good, honest and kind man. And I know you wouldn't have told anybody without, you wouldn't have told anybody really, would you? If you'd have thought about it. You made a mistake, didn't you?" Kieran, almost in tears, said, "I did. I made a terrible mistake and I broke my word and I'm so embarrassed about it." And the leprechaun said, "Look, here's the thing. We're all allowed to make a mistake. No one's perfect, not even me, and I'm a leprechaun. Well, I'm going to make another pair of brogues. And you've learned a lesson, so you'll not be telling anybody." "Oh no," said Kieran, "thank you so much. You're very, very kind." And then the leprechaun said, "But here, you have to pay me for this." And Kieran was a bit sort of, "I don't have any money. What am I going to do?" And the leprechaun said, "I travel around the whole of Ireland, as you do. And I make shoes for the fairy folk, for the leprechauns, for all the rest of the magical people. Now, when I go and make those shoes for them, I just make the shoes. For years I've wanted to be able to tell a story, but I've never learned one properly. Would you teach me a story?" Kieran O'Kelly was absolutely delighted. And the two of them sat down and Kieran taught him a couple of stories. he told him the story about the two the Danann. Oh, and the harp of the Dagda. Big long story. But he broke it up into little stories so that the leprechaun learned little bits. The leprechaun was absolutely delighted. Thank you so much, Kieran. Thank you so much for teaching me that story. I'm so happy about this. Now just give me 5 minutes. And off the leprechaun went. And he made the most beautiful pair of shoes. In fact, they were even more beautiful than they were before. But of course they weren't shoes. What were they? They were brogues. That's right. Kieran put them on his feet. And the wee leprechaun looked at him and said, "The very best day to you, Kieran. It's been a great day for me to meet you again. Look after yourself and keep telling stories." And Kieran went off with a smile on his face and a click of his heels, and he started to tell stories again. The light was back in his eyes and the laughter was in his voice. And that's the story of Kieran Okelly and the leprechaun. So I hope you enjoyed my wee stories. I'll be telling a few more over the next weeks. So maybe you'd like to join me and I'll tell you, well, I'll maybe tell you another story about a leprechaun. Oh, but I've got a great story about a young fella and wolves and a little girl who was the most disobedient child ever. Oh, she had almost a terrible fate happen to her. I'm saying too much. Let's hope we meet again. Take care. Good night. Sleep well.